Today's video we're going to be discussing repairing the Montgomery Ward Deluxe 14-inch chainsaw and its twin, the Remington Mite, where the chain oil is getting into the crankcase because the check valve has gone by. So I'm going to go through the steps and show you what to do. The chainsaw that we're working on is a Montgomery Ward TMC 240078, and it's the same as the Remington Mite. First up you want to do is to remove the chain oil cap and pour out the chain oil. Now I've already done that. You can look down in there and see there's no oil. The next step is to remove the nut. Take the chain and this cover off. Be sure and loosen the screw that adjusts the chain. It'll make it easier to go back on. Notice this cover plate has a dimple right here, and that dimple has to fit in this groove right here. Once you pull the chain and the bar off, you have to take this last plate off, and then you're going to clean all of the wood chips out of this area here, because that's where we're getting into. This cover has to come off. I have all the sawdust chips cleaned off. We have to take this clutch off. Notice that it shows off to turn the clutch this particular direction. But the housing is free to spin, and so is the cylinder. So you have to hold the cylinder to make this work. Remove the recoil starts 3 screws right here. The 3 screws are out. Notice the one here is the longer screw, and these are the shorter screws. And then the cover just pulls right off. You can use a strap wrench to hold this, or stick a pry bar or a screwdriver carefully in these fingers and use it to hold this flywheel while you turn the clutch off on the other side. To get a hold of the clutch, I have this spanner tool, and basically those 2 knobs fit in the clutch, and then I'll turn it. So here I've got the spanner and I've got the screwdriver wedged to the left side, and so I'm just pushing up gently and the clutch is turned loose. I don't know if you can see that it's turning. Okay, so I'll finish taking it off here and it'll just fall off. Then there's a disc on the inside. It's like a spacer. Then behind it is the bearing, and then behind that is the sprocket assembly, and behind that is a washer. So be sure you put those on in the correct order. The grab bar covers up this tank too, so we have to remove this screw and the screw on the bottom right here. Notice that the long screw went on the top and the short screw went on the bottom under here. This is the oil flow screw that feeds the chain, and then we need to remove these other screws right here. All 4 screws were the same length, and now that I'm peeling this out, even though I dumped out the oil, you can see that the oil is oozing, so set you up some paper towels to gather it. And you have to pull this piece out, this end, and sort of rock it this way. Here you can see I've got it pulled out. What's going on is the oil prime rod is grabbing into this cylinder that holds the feed valve, and it just is all real tight, so you have to pull it out carefully. I don't know if I can do this with one hand or not. You can see right here this little escutcheon of the cylinder, how it's got to clear this stanchion. That's the thing that binds, and so you kind of have to pull it out, and then the plunger fits in the end of this pump housing. The culprit we're going after is this check valve right here. This check valve used to have a duckbill valve in it, but in this particular saw, this duckbill went bad, allowing the oil in this chamber to seep into the crankcase and flood the engine with oil. I took this opportunity to scrape some of this loose sawdust with oil mixed in it. I'll be wiping it out next. To let some of this oil ooze out, I've just tipped the saw over on its side. I'm going to let it sit for a while. Here's a close-up view of this part. On the back side is a screen, but the innards inside this, I don't know if you can see, there's remnants of something inside. Using a blunted nail, I'm going to put that to the inside and push this into this check valve. It doesn't take much, and it pushes the screen out. Here we can see the screen removed and the shoulder where the screen was. And in the screen you can see there's a little black residue from the duckbill valve that disintegrated. Using this squared off nail, I scraped the inside of the barrel of this check valve. You see the black residue, that's what was left of the duckbill valve. Here we see two different duckbill valves, and I've got the part numbers you'll see elsewhere in the video. And in this case, as long as this valve body is, I'm going to use the green one, which is the longer one. This is the part number for the longer duckbill valve. This is the Sten's brand duckbill valve. This is the Oregon brand duckbill valve. Here you see the green one partially inserted, and it pushes right in. And it's wedged in there, tight. With the green duckbill valve inserted, you can see the head of the duckbill valve sticks up higher than the shoulder. This screen was wedged into place, so there'd be no way for me to secure this screen back in place. In this picture you can see I set the screen adjacent to the hole where this check valve installs, and that screen will not cover all the possible protrusions, so I need to get a piece of screen material, cut it to that size and shape, and insert it below this check valve. Here I have a aerator screen from a faucet I'll be cutting to fit into the hole. Here I'm using a drill to see what size it is, and the hole is 11/32, so that's how big I'll cut the screen. Here I use a conventional scissors to cut it. I'll be able to get two screens out of this mesh. Here you can see I've cut the circle filter mesh. Here I'm going to set the filter mesh down inside the cavity. It's laying in the cavity a little cocked on an angle because it's not forced all the way in. I'm going to use one end of a drill and push it in the rest of the way. It'll be the next size smaller than an 11/32. Now you can see the screen is pushed all the way into the bottom. Wrap the check valve with Teflon tape. Next step is to insert the check valve into the body. The problem is this piece is in the way, so you have to push with one finger gently to turn this, and I can't do that and hold the camera. Using a 7/16 socket, you can, using the one hand pushing up on this, I was able to get the socket to slide past, and so now I can tighten it. Just for clearance, I would turn the point of the check valve so that it rides in the groove of the rubber bellows here. It's very important to clean this mating surface on the housing, because if you don't, the pressure that builds up from the cylinder pushing through this replaced check valve will cause leaks around here, and it's very predominant to get a leak across the top here because there's only one screw here, one screw here, where you have all these other screws across the bottom. So it's real important to have this good and clean, and then apply a good automotive style oil resistant sealant compound. While the oil pump cover is off, carefully remove this little spring clip, bringing out the piston and its spring. I'm replacing the oil O-ring here. Also, the hose that goes to the filter for the pickup was dried out, so I put a new piece on there. And lastly, not shown on the diagram, there's a little wedged plug right here that was not wedged in very well, and as I turned the unit upside down, that fell out and had a spring behind it. So I pressed that piece in right below the gasket. New O-ring in place, ready to install. The spring goes in first, followed by the piston. This is going to take two hands to push the piston in and push this retainer in it. You'll find it easiest to use an 11/32 drill holding the butt end onto the retainer clip while you push the piston in. Here we can see the drill butt end. You see the retainers pushed in evenly. On the outside of this case is a screw needle adjustment which controls the amount of oil being pumped in the automatic mode into the chain. And this has a very small O-ring. It also has a little nylon tab that's in the threads to keep it from backing out. Mine was 1.5 turns removed. Using an O-ring pick, take this O-ring off of here. The O-ring in the center is the one I removed. The one on the left is a 3mm with a 1mm core, and the one on the right is a 4mm with a 1mm core. With that 3mm O-ring installed, you can see it sticks up just enough that it will bite on the outside of the collar. Put the needle into the opening and apply a screwdriver. It'll take a little pressure to get it in. Here is the gasket that mate to the oil port. Right here is the line that goes and comes out right here in oil's chain. And this mates to the oil pump outer housing. This is the oil tank gasket. It works for both the Remington and the Montgomery Ward. On goes the new gasket. Pressing it over the pins. When it's time to reassemble the oil tank half onto the housing, I don't have all the parts in here at the moment, but you'll notice the manual rod here is going to be in the way to put this in. It will not fit. The trick is, upon insertion, you have to take a screwdriver, nudge this over when you go to put this piece in place. The pickup tube needs to sit right in here, and then it curls on the other side of that pin. Here you can see the white rod from the manual primer and the housing on the right where it's hitting the screw attachment point, and it will not clear without prying that white piece out into the tube. Here you can see I've just gently taken that white tube, which is just beyond my finger, got it into the plunger area, and the butt end has cleared the stanchion right there. You can just see the alignment pin here and here that you have to wiggle this housing to get it to line up. Now you can see the housing is lined up, and it clears the chain bar attachment point. 4 of the 5 screws are in position, and gently screw these down just so they're finger snug. And then we're going to put this bracket on and tighten this guy down really tight, followed by this one here, because this is the area that tends to leak, and then go around and tighten it. The next step is to reinstall the grab bar. There's a long and a short screw that are countersunk. The long screw goes through the tank. It's easier to start the bottom screw first. You've got the saw upside down. Now that the bottom screw is installed and tightened, the top bar doesn't line up easily, but you just press with your thumb and align it to get the screw started. Now that the screw is in the hole, we'll go ahead and tighten it in place. And this is the other part that holds the tank in. Here I've tightened this one really tight, then going through and tightened these, going back to this one again, and just kept circling around until they were really snug. There will be a little bit of sealant material that oozes out. Just take a screwdriver, gently wipe it out. Next, we're going to reinstall the clutch and the sprocket, starting with the washer. This is the side that's up against the engine. This is the side that rides against the chain. Next, the needle bearing. Next, the sprocket. Next, this washer. Notice the side that's been up against the bearing and the side that's been up against the clutch. Then this installs with the writing that says off to the outside. And this is counterclockwise, so it's a left-hand thread. When you're tightening this clutch and sprocket, you have to hold the flywheel because the flywheel and the crankshaft will turn. In this case, you can see the spanner is installed. Recoil starter housing goes back on, long screw in the front, shorter screws in the back. The last step is to reinstall the chain. The first piece that goes on is this chain guide diverter. Followed by the bar.